What's up, First Take fam? Thank you so much for being with us on this Friday Eve. Tomorrow, we will be in New Orleans for the NBA All-Star Game. Come on down. Catch us live from the Big Easy. The location is 4th floor of the Riverview Room on Decatur Street. We're going to have special guests, giveaways. Get there early. Doors open 7:30 a.m. Come on down and pack the house and watch First Take in person. But right now, we have a lot to get into. Carmelo Anthony replaces Kevin Love in the All-Star Game, but does he deserve that spot, and who does? Gronk and J.J. Watt are coming off serious injuries, but which star are these guys more worried about moving forward? And Tom Brady wins his 5th Super Bowl, but who was the best player in 2016? Let's get it started. Good day. It's Friday Eve. Welcome into First Take. Thank you so much for spending part of your day here with us. Molly Karam in Bristol. Your boys are in New Orleans with all that good food ahead of Sunday's NBA All-Star Game. Hi, guys.
What's up? What's up?
Molly.
Good morning. How y'all doing?
Good. A lot to get into.
Today?
And you both know where we're starting, right? Let's do it. After last week's Charles Oakley's controversy, the Warriors' Draymond Green had some strong comments about Knicks owner James Dolan. This was Green on his Dre Day podcast.
This is Charles Oakley. Why is he buying tickets to the game? If I'm not mistaken, Dolan's was owning that team when he was playing. It wasn't a problem when he was speaking out then. It wasn't a problem when he was protecting their superstars then. And so if it wasn't a problem then when he were doing it for y'all, why is it all of a sudden a problem now when he speak out on something that he don't like? And now you want to disown him from your entire organization. That's a slave mentality. You're doing it for me, it's all good. But now you're doing it against me, or not necessarily against me, but you're speaking out against my organization. It's not good anymore. That's a slave mentality, slave master mentality.
All right, there's that. Draymond not mincing words. Stephen A., what's your reaction to Green using the slavery comparison?
I thought it was excessive. I thought it was uncalled for, and I thought it was unnecessary. And you're listening to a huge, huge fan of Draymond Green. He could be on my team any day of the week. He's a great person. He's a great warrior. And I'm not talking about the Golden State Warriors. I'm talking about he's a fighter on the basketball court. He played for my favorite coach in all of college basketball, which is Tom Izzo. But I thought he was a bit excessive here. If he had pointed to Charles Oakley being physically removed from the arena as cause for him to get to that point, I could understand that. But he was simply talking about Charles Oakley saying things that were deemed as insulting to the Knicks organization, and James Dolan responding by wanting him removed from the arena. The fact of the matter is that you've got to know the history of Charles Oakley and the history of James Dolan. James Dolan is inept. He is not a great owner at all. He's great at making money, but winning is not his forte. If you want to win, you don't want James Dolan as the owner of your basketball team. The facts prove as much. But the facts also prove that he employs an abundance of African Americans within Madison Square Garden. He always has. The facts prove that Charles Oakley, a good dude, somebody that I've known for 20 years, has never been shy about saying whatever it is that he feels about the Knicks organization, because he's appalled that they've struggled so much and so miserably. Not to mention the fact that James Dolan didn't really take over until 1999. Charles Oakley was there from 88 to 98. Dolan was a part of the mix, but it was James Dolan's father who had presided over Madison Square Garden along with others. And it was during the Dave Checketts era, which included Pat Riley. And then after that, Jeff Van Gundy, Ernie Grunfeld, now the president of basketball operations in Washington, was there and presiding over the New York Knicks as a GM at the time. So the organization was vastly different at that time that Oakley was there than it has been under the James Dolan regime. So you got to remember that James Dolan literally met and sat down with Charles Oakley for the first time ever just the other day in the commissioner's office. You take all of those things into consideration, and you're Charles Oakley on the record really wanting to be a part of the Knick fabric and the Knick family and what have you. If you're James Dolan and he says he wants these things, but you believe that he is insulting you, a lot of people in James Dolan's position are not going to act favorably for him. The reason why I think, Max, ultimately that Draymond Green's comments were a bit excessive is because outside of security guards forcibly removing Charles Oakley, because we all know that was wrong, excessive and unnecessary on the part of James Dolan and the New York Knicks. In terms of not wanting to receive a shrapnel of criticism and not being receptive to you for throwing it in his direction, I don't care whether you're white, you're black, you're Jewish, you're Catholic, you're Latino, you're Native American, you're Asian, or whomever. When you are in an authoritative position and somebody comes at you that way, you usually don't respond favorably. That's a matter of somebody not liking you. That's not a matter of racism. And that's where or slavery or a slave mentality per se. And that's where I took issue with what Draymond said in this particular situation. It's applicable at times in the world of sports more than people realize. But in this particular instance, I don't believe that to be the case.
Draymond Green was wrong. He should not have compared it to slavery. Slavery, the history of slavery in this country involved the destruction of generation after generation of human beings. And that's not what this is. This is kind of business practice in the United States of America that he's objecting to. But let me say, when he brings it up, as objectionable as it may be to many, we can't pretend we don't understand what he's talking about. It is hard to ignore that the NBA is a largely African-American league in terms of labor, in terms of the players. And the owners are almost exclusively white. And that is connected to the legacy of slavery. So that when we see an owner treating a former player in a way that even appears, rightly or wrongly, but the optics are that it's dehumanizing, the way he's treating that player, that connection in people's minds and the optics of the league will bring what Draymond Green is talking about into mind. I mean, it will bring it into focus. So I get what he means, but I think it was clumsily stated, because anytime you compare anything to the institution of slavery and the reverberation since, you're kind of discrediting or not really properly respecting the suffering of and the human catastrophe that was the institution of slavery in the United States. And by the way, I know what it sounds like for a white guy on TV to be saying that about an African-American player who does have a point to make. Nevertheless, I think he was wrong to compare it to slavery, at least, or a slave owner's mentality. At least it was clumsily stated. It needed to be articulated better, I think, Stephen A.
Well, first of all, I completely agree with you, Max, and I appreciate you saying what you said, because you're absolutely on the money. And I'll piggyback off of that by simply, saying something that I want you to comment on here. One of the things that really, that I pay real attention to, particularly as an African American, is that making sure things count. In other words, when you use incendiary language or polarizing a language, and you know that it's going to be talked about and debated about and what have you, you have a responsibility, particularly when you bring up one of the isms, to make sure that it counts, to make sure that it's applicable accurately so, and it's something that's relatively undeniable so it can provoke a larger discussion. When you do something like Draymond just did, you minimize the discussion. You don't elevate it. Because if you're a white individual out there like Ryan Russillo, who was on Mike and Mike this morning talking about it, I'm sure he might take some heat for what he said, because he was just saying, when has it ever been a problem just not to like somebody? The fact of the matter is, everything that he was saying, elaborating on the Draymond Green scenario here, Ryan Russillo was absolutely right in what he was saying, and I defend him to the nth degree. There are times when somebody doesn't like you. That doesn't make it racism. I know of athletes who were late tens of times to practice, and then people talked about, well, they're being treated a certain way because somebody doesn't like them and it's racism. No, they don't like you. Or, you have individuals that didn't have the greatest reputation inside of locker rooms, and then all of a sudden we're talking about race again. No, they didn't like your behind. It has nothing to do with you being black. It has everything to do with how you're conducting yourself. Those are the kind of things I think that we have to pay attention to, Max, because if we don't, what happens is, when we really have a bona fide, salient, poignant argument, it gets diminished because people are exhausted from the topic of bringing up race, and they actually have an excuse to be exhausted by it because it was brought up on too many occasions when it had no business being brought up.
But in this case, two things. I'll deal with what you just said in a second. In this case, what are the optics? The optics are it was an African American, and the owner is white. And so, sure, Ryan Russillo and whoever else brings up the point. It's not a crime to not like someone, but power dynamics are important. There is a reason that ownership is almost exclusively white, and that is the legacy of slavery in this country. There's no getting around that. The fact that it's almost exclusively white and that labor is largely African American. So the optics, even in instances, and I'm not saying this is one of them, where the owner might be right and the player or former player might be wrong. It doesn't seem to be the case here, but let's say it was. The optics are important, and it will resonate with people in a certain way that reminds them of the history of inequity in this country. That's one. Two, you bring up the isms, right? Don't dilute legitimate claims of racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, homophobia, etc., which are alive and well in this country. Don't dilute those claims with claims that are themselves diluted, that may have a point in there somewhere, but don't really apply with full force, aren't really literal. And I agree with that. I agree with that as any person from a persecuted minority in this country, or even just people who are socially conscious who aren't from persecuted minority in terms of the culture of their background. I think we should recognize that. I think that's a valid point. If you run around claiming racism where it's not clear, where it's unclear that it's directly racism, or sometimes where it doesn't exist, it does dilute claims and undermine claims, legitimate claims of racism, which, as I mentioned, are alive and well. In this case, I understand what Draymond was getting at. It was clumsily stated and therefore could be put in the, hey, you're diluting the real discussion category.
Well, the other thing that I think is important to mention, Max, before we finish this segment is that, you also have to take into account that even though it was clumsily stated and what have you, you have to have justification for it, and you have to take into account the ramifications. For example, you allude to ownership. Sure, the NBA has mostly white owners. The first African-American majority owner in major professional sports in this country happened to be Bob Johnson. Who's that for? The Charlotte Bobcats, now the Charlotte Hornets, who, by the way, is in the National Basketball Association. The majority owner of the Charlotte Hornets right now is who, Max Kellerman? It would happen to be
Michael Jordan.
When you look at, all right, do you see an African-American owner in Major League Baseball? Do you see an African-American owner in the National Football League? Do you see an African-American owner in hockey? The list goes on and on. So when we look at it, we understand that, as Richard Lapchick historically points out, that the NBA has an edge on other major sports entities in this nation as it pertains to African Americans. And so I'm just saying the point is that doesn't absolve something like this from happening. In other words, if indeed you have an owner with a slave mentality or whatever, it doesn't mean that this sport is immune to those circumstances. But it does mean you have to take into account that when we discuss the word progress as it pertains to major professional sports in this country, there is no doubt that the NBA, with the athletes and the way they're being paid, with the guaranteed contracts, with African Americans holding head coaching positions and executive positions as GMs or what have you, with an African American being an owner, the NBA is ahead of the curve. And if you're Draymond Green and you're en route to New Orleans for NBA All-Star Weekend and you bring this up on the eve of that, how are you looking out for the brand that has clearly helped facilitate you being where you are today? These are the kind of things you have to take into consideration.
I think it's instructive, though, that it's celebrated that there's one African-American owner in the NBA, which was largely perceived for most of its history as the African-American sport among the major sports. And the reason for that is wealth is concentrated with white people. And those social networks then reinforce who owns what, especially in major leagues. And so, therefore, again, I appreciate the gist of what Draymond is saying. The optics are important. The power dynamics are important. But in this case, though that resonates with it, and it's connected to the history of this country, in this case, what I believe actually happened was a powerful business owner treated a former laborer shabbily. And yes, there's the optics of race involved, but it's really a criticism in this moment, I think, of business more than the legacy of slavery.
Well said, Max. Let's take this conversation in a different direction because that's not all Draymond was in the news for. So he was ejected late in the first half of Wednesday's 109-86 win over the Kings after drawing a pair of technical fouls for arguing. Green was called for a shooting foul on All-Star DeMarcus Cousins with 35 seconds remaining in the half. He drew a technical for his immediate reaction, then a second ejection for continuing to complain. They were his 9th and 10th techs of the season. Steve Kerr, how do you feel about the ejection?
Is there any concern with Draymond, accumulating technical fouls and just his controlling his emotions in general? I mean,
yeah. How's that? Is that good? We love Draymond. He plays with an edge, and we need that edge. In many ways, he kind of represents our toughness and our energy, and it's we struggle sometimes without him to bring the energy, but he's always going to play on that edge, and tonight he crossed the edge, and we need him to walk that line, and we don't want to take away that chip on his shoulder, but we need him on the floor.
Max, walking that line can be difficult because some felt Draymond's edge cost the Warriors a chip last year. How concerned should Golden State be about Green?
Coach said it perfectly. I mean, that's exactly right. There are teams throughout history, teams Dennis Rodman was on, for example, several of them, that have that Dennis Rodman style player or Draymond Green player. High energy, does all the things you want him to do out there on the floor, very valuable player, and even the energy in the locker room can be valuable and infectious, contagious, and can help the team. But the question with those players is always, can they walk the line? And the answer for Draymond Green last year in the finals was no, he couldn't. And many, including Stephen A. Smith, I'm not one of them, but Stephen A. Smith believes that it cost them the finals. And by the way, it's one of the things I point to when I say LeBron James is in his full maturity as a player, that he recognized that. I don't often talk about that. I talk about how he screamed on Steph Curry and I thought took his heart in a critical moment. He also recognized that Draymond Green is walking the line and one more slip up and he's in trouble. And I thought LeBron went right at that, and Draymond bit. He fell for the bait. He took the bait, and it absolutely cost them. And don't think it can't happen again. It absolutely can happen again if he hasn't learned his lesson from last year. Unclear that he has.
I think that the Golden State Warriors need to have some kind of intervention with Draymond Green. I think it needs to include his college coach at Michigan State, Tom Izzo, who still speaks to him frequently. I think Steve Kerr, I think Bob Myers, I think Joe Lacob, they all need to get him in the room and remind him of what happened last year. I'm going to say it before, I'll say it again. I don't believe there's any way that the Cleveland Cavaliers come back from a 3-1 deficit if Draymond Green doesn't get suspended for Game 5, because I think they went into Game 5 with momentum. I understand that they lost it once Cleveland won Game 5. But if Draymond Green were available for that game, I think the Golden State Warriors would have won the title back at Golden State. There would not have been a Game 6 and there would not have been a Game 7. Having said all of that, the reason why I think an intervention is needed is because somebody's got to check Draymond Green. I told you I love him. I love the guy personally. I love him as a player. He could be on my team any day. But as important as he is, he ain't a superstar. And my problem with him is that he's acting like a superstar, thinking that he's going to have the cachet to get away with it. He is Dennis Rodman. He is Rasheed Wallace to some degree, meaning that you have the history of having a certain kind of temperament where they get to prejudge you, where they walk into a game with preconceived notions because your body of work shows that you are a relative loose cannon and they have to reel you in. This is why you got suspended for Game 5. You didn't get suspended for Game 5 because you went at LeBron James' groin. You got suspended for Game 5 because it wasn't a standalone act in the eyes of Kiki Vandeweghe, the disciplinaries are for the NBA and the NBA itself. You had had accrued enough flagrant foul points, which was the number 4, to get you to the point where they were able to suspend you for the game because of what happened against Houston, because of what happened against Portland. Those are the kind of things that happened in the postseason leading up to that finals appearance, or actually Oklahoma City with Steven Adams. Those are the kind of things that happened that led up to you being suspended for Game 5. You had accrued enough points. So even though this is the regular season and you get to have a clean slate in the postseason as it pertains to those flagrant fouls, in the end, your reputation is such that you are not LeBron, you are not Steph Curry, you are not any of these guys who are going to get the benefit of the doubt. You're going to get it in reverse. They're going to assume you're guilty and presume you're guilty as opposed to innocent, and that could end up costing Golden State again. He has been told this. He needs to be told it again and again and again, because if he keeps this up, Max, he is going to cost the Golden State Warriors a title.
Yep.
He better be careful, and somebody needs to tell him.
And I spoke about optics with the last comment about Draymond Green. How about the optics here? On the day he makes news for commenting on the Knicks and Jim Dolan in a controversial way, on that day, he gets into it with DeMarcus Cousins, who himself doesn't have a great reputation for self-control, and he's the one who winds up with the technical, and he could be on his way to a suspension, and we're asking these questions about Draymond now.
And the last point about it is this. This is what makes this so ridiculous. It's the regular season. Relax, chill out, because you're going to the postseason. You're going to be a top 2 seed. Even though you may feel like you're wronged, it's not that big a deal this time of year. And I think Draymond is thinking, well, all of this gets wiped out once the playoffs begins, but he's not taking into account what his reputation is growing to be. And if you're not taking that into account, he's not realizing that your actions during the regular season may provoke referees and officials to look at you in a certain way come the postseason, and it's going to cost you. He has to pay attention to that. He really does.
And even the good stuff he brings, which is energy on the floor and even energy in the locker room, you have to ask yourself at a certain point, does that energy become white noise?
Meanwhile, the Texans defense didn't fall apart with the lengthy absence of J.J. Watt and with the emergence of Jadeveon Clowney. So some are arguing that dealing J.J. Watt isn't a crazy idea. A CBS Sports article polled NFL executives on this subject, and a specific trade scenario was thrown out centered on the Texans shipping Watt to the Patriots for Rob Gronkowski, who's clearly the best tight end in football when healthy. So one executive said, I can't imagine teams making this trade. Gronkowski's back. An injury history scares me much more than Watts. Darren Woodson in the house. I have a friend. How are we doing?
Good. I'm doing great.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
We will get your thoughts on this in just a minute.
Molly?
Yes.
Molly, I would like to know, why do we have
here we go.
Darren Woodson on the show?
The Super Bowl champ?
I didn't know he was allowed. Hold on. I didn't know he was allowed to talk about anything other than the Cowboys. And when the Cowboys lost, there was an APB out for him. I had Dallas, Texas security looking for him for about 2 weeks.
We couldn't find Super Bowl champions on the show.
Oh, please. I showed up. You guys didn't call me back. I was here with Molly. Me and Molly were hanging out the whole time.
Just Google it.
Whatever. You changed your number.
You're always in the studio when we're on the road.
I'm back.
Whatever.
Stephen
Couldn't
A.
find him. Still looking for him.
He's here now. Stephen A., stay focused for me. Who are you more worried about, Gronk or Watt?
For me, it's Gronk. Listen, being on the defensive line, Darren, in all seriousness, would know this better than me, but being a defensive lineman, going after the quarterback, obviously you got big bodies that you're going up against, but essentially your job is very, very simple. Stop the run, get at the quarterback. It's just that simple. You're Gronk, you're running routes, you're catching passes, and more importantly, you're not able to protect yourself while trying to catch passes the way that a J.J. Watt is able to protect himself. I know J.J. Watt has had multiple surgeries. I know his back has been an issue, but Rob Gronkowski, he's had a plethora of injuries over the last few years. I mean, and knees and, just back, everything. I mean, collarbone, if I remember correctly. He's pretty beat up to the point where the reason why you're talking about trading him is primarily because, you're not accustomed to him being available. As Bill Belichick once said, we're used to this by now. because he gets hurt all the time and he's more fragile. So when I look at it from that perspective, I just look at it and say to myself, you know what, I would be more concerned about Gronk than Watt just because of the position that they play alone personally.
For exactly that reason, I think you're wrong. For exactly the reason you bring up, the position they play, the answer is J.J. Watt. You should be more concerned about J.J. Watt. First of all, if you read the trade proposals, it's not just Watt for Gronk. It's Watt for Gronk and stuff. And that's not because the perception is Gronk is diminished, because Gronk is the best tight end in the game when he's on the field. It's that's how good Watt is. J.J. Watt is considered an MVP caliber player, and he plays defense, and defensive players are rarely given serious consideration for MVP in the league. But his prime is practically like Lawrence Taylor's. That's how dominant it's been, or Bruce Smith, all-time greats like that. The question is, how long can you keep that up, given the rigors of exactly what you brought up, Stephen A., that position? J.J. Watt, it's not like he's had digits and limbs operated on. He's had problems with his back, his groin, his core, all the central stuff that can debilitate a player. And every single play is the equivalent of a car crash for J.J. Watt. Not so for Gronk. Even though Gronk plays very physically, there can be plays where he goes untouched. J.J. Watt, every single play is in an auto wreck. And given the way his core has been debilitated, the quality and length of his prime so far, which is already practically as good as it gets in terms of how long he's competed on that level, I would be more concerned if I were the team receiving J.J. Watt, particularly because I got to give up Gronk and stuff to get him.
No. Listen, trust me, I had 2 back surgeries. The last one ended my career, and I understand on both sides, Gronk and J.J. Watt. But listen, Gronk started in 2009 at the University of Arizona is when he had his first surgery. That was in college. And then he comes into the league and has 9 more surgeries. And Stephen A. just pointed out, listen, he makes a living in between the numbers. And what did we see on every injury that Gronk had in that little video clip? They all took place inside the numbers, inside the 20s, where the Patriots make hay. That's where it is with Gronk. Gronk can't see the hits coming. It's one thing when you can see the hits coming and you know you have to lock down a tight end or on an offensive tackle as far as rushing them and you know exactly where the hit is coming. It's another thing when you don't see that safety. It's another thing when you don't see that linebacker coming. It's another one when you don't see the corner coming to you when you're running into cover 2. Gronk is a huge target, and at that size, at 6'7", 280 pounds or 270 pounds, it's a hard fall going down to the ground when you cannot see the hit coming. Gronk is a huge concern as far as where he goes as far as his injuries are concerned.
Molly, there's only one problem that I have with Darren Woodson's synopsis there, and it is this. You just need to come out and flagrantly admit to the national audience that you completely agree with Stephen A. That's all you needed to say. I mean, you do understand that. I mean, you basically agree with everything that I say. So I just want you to admit
I'm going over
that.
to Max. Max, I'm with you now, Max.
And you don't mean it. You don't mean it. Your soliloquy shows that you don't mean it, and it's okay, Darren. It's all right. It's all right.
The bottom line is Gronk, and listen, they're both on teams that would be trading from surplus. The fact that Clowney played so well in Watt's absence gives people the idea maybe they don't need Watt because that defense stayed maybe the best in the NFL even without Watt. And the fact that the Patriots just won the Super Bowl without Gronk. Listen, Bennett played really well. The fact that it's perceived that you'd be dealing from surplus, each team, and addressing the other's need. That's what's intriguing about the idea of that trade. But again, Gronk, when on the field, can still do damage. I wouldn't anticipate that he'd be on the field for the entire season, but he can still do damage. Watt, you've seen defensive players. I brought up LT. LT went from best player I ever saw with my own eyes through his prime to a nice player, but clearly not the kind of all-world impact player that we were accustomed to. The same thing could happen to Watt here.
Absolutely. That's called Father Time. If you didn't know, Father Time does play a big role in, where you go. LT, great player. Father Time caught up to him. And it's no different from J.J. Watt. At some point, Father Time will catch up to him as well. The dynamic is exactly the same. I just feel in the end, Rob Gronkowski is a guy who has a huge target on his chest and can't see the hits coming. He's a guy that you really have to be concerned about as far as his history with injuries.
I'll close out this segment with two quick comments. Number one, in regards to what Max said about people may not feel like you don't need Watt as much because of the way Clowney performed. The only people who believe that are individuals who were hanging out with Randy Gregory and the other suspended Cowboys doing the things that they do. That's number one. That's number
Molly's
one.
going to deduct
and
a point for that.
Number two, I want to sit up there and say, Darren Woodson, since you echoed the expertise of yours truly, you're welcomed on the show after all.
Carmelo Anthony was named to his 10th All-Star game yesterday and coincidentally comes in place of Kevin Love, the player he's been mentioned in trade reports over the past month. So Love is out 6 weeks with a knee injury. Carmelo, what does this mean to you?
It means a lot. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's still an honor to be kind of named to the All-Star team to go out there and represent despite of everything that's been going on and surrounding us and surrounding me and surrounding kind of our organization is to still go out there and represent not just the organization but New York City as a whole. It's still an honor for me to do that.
All right, Stephen A., I know Melo's your boy and the Knicks are your squad, but does Carmelo deserve to be an All-Star?
It's not that he doesn't deserve to be an All-Star because Melo's an All-Star talent and he's All-Star caliber. It's not about that. It's about who does he deserve it more than. And I have to admit, he does not deserve it more than Bradley Beal of the Washington Wizards. He just doesn't. The Washington Wizards are winning. They're like 33-21. They are 26-8 over their last 34 games. They have been playing better. And when you take that into consideration and you look at a Bradley Beal who's averaging 22.3 points, he's shooting 47% from the field, he's shooting 40% from three-point range, okay? He's shooting 81% from the free throw line. He's the second leading scorer on a Washington Wizards team that's been playing top 5 basketball in the league, okay, over the last 34 games. I think you take that into consideration. You consider his contribution to the success of the Washington Wizards, and you simply can't ignore it. And by the way, he's doing it only shooting 16 times a game. That's what I look at right now. Carmelo Anthony is an all-star talent. I know he's a perennial all-star. And I get that. But when you consider the fact that the commissioner, Adam Silver, had to make a choice because of the injury to Kevin Love, I think Melo, being, his history, being in the New York market, may have to some degree contributed to that. I don't believe it should have. I think something has to be said for success combined with the contribution you make towards success. And when you consider what Bradley Beal has done and the way the Washington Wizards has looked compared to how the New York Knicks have looked the other night, having lost 20 of their last 27 games. I mean, come on now. I can't ignore that, and I can't just shove that aside because of Carmelo Anthony's greatness. Bradley Beal has been very, very effective, on par with what we're seeing from Melo. And I think the fact that the Washington Wizards have obviously been significantly more productive than the New York Knicks, I think he deserved the nod ahead of Melo.
I can't believe what I'm hearing from Stephen A. Smith. I can't believe after all, I started the season saying Carmelo Anthony's at best the 4th best guy at his position. LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and then Carmelo Anthony. You were pushing back on that. I was telling you Carmelo Anthony may not be a top 15 player, definitely not a top 10 player. You thought I was crazy. And now when push comes to shove, because you can't say, oh, he's an all-star talent. He's basically an all-star, but he's not an all-star. The whole point of an all-star game, when you're making these selections, is you have to make a choice. Either he is or he isn't. If there's someone better than him or more deserving than him, that means that year he wasn't good enough to be an all-star because there are only so many spots on the roster, and he did not make the cut. That's what you're like when everyone was going through Mount Rushmores a couple years ago. Who's on your Mount Rushmore of all-time great Lakers? The whole point of that exercise is, wow, Wilt Chamberlain doesn't make Mount Rushmore for the Lakers? That's the point of an all-star team. These are the best of the best. Who made it? If you didn't make it, you weren't good enough. That means you're not an all-star player that year. That's Carmelo Anthony this year, according to you. Not according to me. I actually think Carmelo Anthony was the right choice. And I know, look, You mentioned perennial all-star, except for he made the team in 07-08. Then he was hurt 08-09. He played like 60-something games. And then he's been an all-star every year since, including this year. He's a perennial all-star, and he deserves it. He's that caliber player. Even though I think he's slightly overrated, you have to acknowledge his sustained excellence. He's a baller. And I understand the idea. Look, here's a young up-and-coming player. And if it's a choice between the two and it's close, maybe go with him. And he's on a winning team. If you look at the numbers, every number you cited for Beal, Carmelo's doing the same thing. And yes, Beal's on a winning team in a winning culture at the moment. Carmelo is suffering through the opposite on a miserable team. He's being undermined by the head of basketball operations at every turn, made to look bad in the most intense media market on planet Earth. And all he does is go out night after night and ball. And if it's close, I'll take the perennial all-star who's continuing to toil successfully through adversity. At least his game is he can't do everything about the dysfunction of the team. And I'll take him over the up-and-coming guy who's having a nice season, who's, by the way, still has time to make all-star teams.
Well, first of all, I think all your arguments are sound, Max. I can't sit up there and just summarily dismiss it. I get where you're coming from, but my problem is this. Remember how awful the Knicks were a couple of years ago when All-Star festivities were at Madison Square Garden, and we know how awful they were, and because it was going to be in New York, Melo had an opportunity to represent the New York Knicks, even though they were absolutely atrocious. I'm tired of making this same argument. I believe that I stand by everything that I said. I think Carmelo Anthony is one of the top offensive players of our generation. I think he's a top 15 talent in the NBA right now, if not top 10. But that, to me, I'm tired of looking at that and ignoring the production or lack thereof of the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks stink. They've lost about 22 of their last 28 games. They are absolutely positively sorry. And when I take that into consideration, even though I have sympathy and I harness sympathy for Carmelo Anthony and what he has to deal with, I don't want to harbor it to the point where I ignore a heightened level of productivity on the part of a different team with a guy in Bradley Beal that has helped significantly along those lines. Otto Porter is a good player. He's growing. Martin Gortat is a decent player. Markieff Morris and others are doing their job. But my God, it's John Wall and Bradley Beal that are carrying this franchise. They've won 26 of their last 34 games. They're a top 3 seed within the Eastern Conference. They are balling. And I'm tired of ignoring those things just because of Carmelo's greatness when the New York Knicks stink. At some point in time, I think we need to get to a point, Max, where we at least lean towards ignoring, even if it means ignoring the greatness of an individual player when their team stinks all the time. There needs to be something that requires you to actually win. And the New York Knicks are not doing it. That ain't Carmelo's fault. But in the end, he's been rewarded multiple times because of his greatness. But the Knicks stink. And I'm tired of that.
Look, I think it kind of is Carmelo's fault. Carmelo could do more to make the team better, and that's why I think he's slightly overrated. Other than the defensive end, he hasn't always made his teammates better. That's a legitimate argument. In the case of this season, particularly with what's gone on at Madison Square Garden, if it's a close call, the way Carmelo has gone through this, I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt and the respect that Silver's given him.
All right, that's got to be the last word there, guys.
Bradley's not better than Carmelo, but I do think he's more worthy of the All-Star this year.
Welcome back into First Take. Molly Karam here with you. Stephen A. and Max Kellerman are down in New Orleans. Stephen A., what are you hot on in hour number 2?
Well, Draymond brought up Charles Oakley. There were some things that needed to be brought up that he was in no position to elaborate on as it pertains to Charles Oakley. I'll be touching on that in hour number 2. That's my final take.
Former player going at Kyle Shanahan. Can't wait to get into that.
We will leave it there. And Will Kane is also here with us right now. And earlier in the show, we talked about Draymond Green's strong comments, obviously, about Knicks owner James Dolan. Take a listen.
This is Charles Oakley. Why is he buying tickets to the game? If I'm not mistaken, Dolan's was owning that team when he was playing. It wasn't a problem when he was speaking out then. It wasn't a problem when he was protecting their superstars then. And so if it wasn't a problem then when he were doing it for y'all, Why is it all of a sudden a problem now when he speak out on something that he don't like, and now you want to disown him from your entire organization? That's a slave mentality. You're doing it for me, it's all good. But now you're doing it against me, or not necessarily against me, but you're speaking out against my organization. It's not good anymore. That's a slave mentality, slave master mentality.
Now I can give you a proper introduction. Will Kane, good to see you. You weren't with us earlier when we discussed this in the show, and we wanted to hear your thoughts on that slave mentality comparison.
Yeah, and I didn't get to hear you guys, Max and Stephen A., specifically on Draymond's statements. But here's what I think is important. And again, you may have made this point. First of all, Draymond's comments they're extremely dumb. I mean, these are just ignorant comments. Anyone that suggests that millionaires or billionaires taking exception to the criticism of millionaires is the equivalent of slave mentality is beyond an ignorant comment. And by the way, anyone who suggests that a former employee criticizing his employer and showing up at his place of work to berate him somehow equates to slave mentality really isn't contributing anything positive to, but actually that's the more important point. It's not just that Draymond's comments are vapid or dumb or can be waved away with your hand. They actually take away from any serious-minded discussion of real issues, the legacy of slavery, racism. By the way, Draymond didn't stop at accusing Dolan of racism. He went all the way to slave master mentality. And when he does that, he diminishes so many things, important things, like legacies of slavery. He diminishes himself. Like, how am I supposed to take Draymond Green seriously on any serious subject in the future? How am I supposed to hear that and think he has something valuable to contribute to a discussion? And finally, this Oakley-Dolan fiasco, it's not like it was an important issue, but somehow Draymond even managed to make it less important. He somehow made it, he managed to diminish something that was already bottom of the barrel in importance as it is. He truly was a special individual in that he managed to diminish the most important and least important issues in our society in one incredibly ignorant statement.
Well, first of all, let me say this. It might be an ignorant statement, but, you know, when you talk the word dumb, what I would ask you to do is watch your mouth. And the reason why I say that, Will, is because even though I tend to disagree with Draymond Green in this particular instance, let's not act like it's beyond the pale for guys to have this kind of mentality when dealing with individuals. If anything, Draymond Green the word ignorant is apropos simply because he hasn't had any dealings with James Dolan personally, and as a result, he wouldn't know, because that's where the word ignorant emanates from. But understanding, you've got the Warren Sapps of the world and others, not that they're the greatest examples, but there have been a plethora of African-American athletes in the history of professional sports, in recent history of professional sports, who have had dealings with millionaires or billionaires or what have you, and they've had the mentality in terms of the manner in which they're spoken to, the manner in which they're treated, and what we as a nation of people, of a disenfranchised community, have been taught through history, how we're dealt with, or how people are dealt with when they feel that way about you, when you're a peon, when you're minimized, when you're not considered. I'm just saying, hold on for a second, because we have a delay here, so I just want you to understand what I'm saying. I'm saying to you that you must take into account the fact that some athletes, as wrong as they may be, because of history and because of what we as African Americans have been taught in terms of how we were treated when we're being minimized, the manner in which you're talked to, the manner in which you're treated in comparison to others around you, there's some validity to folks who would jump to that conclusion. That doesn't mean they don't have to be responsible, but there is something to be said about that, and it can't be summarily dismissed like you are doing.
If I may, Stephen A., first of all, I will not watch my mouth. I will speak plainly. And if that makes people's brains short circuit when I call a comment dumb, so be it. But you and I, Stephen A., have a relationship where you can personally appreciate this. I am not, nor would I, call Draymond Green dumb. There's a difference between saying a statement is dumb and a person is dumb. And I will never beat around the bush or soft pedal a comment that I think is not only dumb but detrimental to serious issues. I don't disagree with what you said about serious issues and the legacy of them, from slavery to Jim Crow to institutional racism, which we've discussed when it comes to the criminal justice system. But let me make this very clear. What Draymond has done, what Draymond has said, that has diminished that point of view, not me calling it dumb. His statement is what takes away from serious discussion of those issues.
It was clumsily stated and wrong, I think. But let's not pretend that we don't understand the gist of it, which is Draymond Green is billionaire, millionaire, and of course, slavery, we're talking about the destruction of human beings, millions of them, over generations. It's very different. I think that's why he used the word mentality. He's not saying it's a literal representation of slavery, but he's saying it's a mentality. And what I gather from that, what I infer, is that he's talking about the power dynamics, Will, and rightly or wrongly, the optics are that, well, this is a fact, and whether or not Dolan was justified, that's a separate issue, but it's almost all white ownership. One African-American owner, who happened to be the greatest athlete in the history of American team sports, Michael Jordan, in a predominantly African-American league. One African-American owner, the rest are white. And so the owner is white, and the labor or former labor is African-American. And the power dynamic is that the owner can move the other guy from the arena, with 5 guys, 6 guys around him. So I'm not questioning his right to do it, or even whether he was right or wrong ethically or morally when the facts come out, or if the facts come out. I'm talking about the optics, because the fact is, the indisputable truth, no one can really argue against the idea that the reason almost all ownership is white is a legacy of slavery.
Yeah, but Max,
it's not because African Americans somehow naturally at a loss in terms of business. It's because they've been systematically excluded. And so when someone says something, even if they put it clumsily, and in a way I agree, dilute the issue when actual issues of racism are more apparent, let's not pretend we don't know what he's talking about. He's referring to power dynamics.
But Max, power dynamics exist in this society across employment spectrums, across racial spectrums, and every time that an employee takes issue with an employer, it can't be equated to a slaveholder's mentality. It can't be that, Max, especially, how about in the heightened scenario of millionaires disagreeing with billionaires? You said rightly or wrongly. It's not rightly or wrongly.
I agree.
It's just
I agree.
wrongly,
He's wrong.
Max.
I agree he's
and
wrong.
Optics,
I agree for
just
this.
last point. Optics is the last failed stronghold of a weak point. I don't care about optics. I care about right and wrong.
You and I actually agree about this. Let's not pretend we don't know what he means.
I mean, guys, y'all are talking about slavery. Can the black dude speak for a second here? Here's the reality of the situation, Will. Draymond made an emotional argument. That's fair. It was an emotional argument. He could have easily called Dolan an insecure bully. He could have gone that route.
Yes.
But what I'm saying to you is that even though we may disagree, when you say speaking plainly, I can respect what you're coming from, but you're also highlighting the fact that, again, you're not black. And as a result, you haven't sat in the seats of black men who have had to deal with elder, more powerful white men. And as a result, the residue of emotion that lends itself towards, you're not taking that into consideration. In speaking plainly and succinctly and bravely, I might add, and candidly, and I applaud you for doing so, which is why I totally applaud you saying what you said. I'm not offended by it. What you have to understand at the end of the day, when you just speak so plainly, is that you are speaking very plainly as a white man.
Yes.
You are not a black
Stephen
man.
A., that
you
is
haven't
fair.
endured what we've endured, and that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm trying to say there.
But if we, and we, the three of us, and then my relationship with you in particular, have earned an element of respect that I would repeat on this program over and over, and that is to take these conversations head on. Face to face. This is one of the unique places where that happens. But I will say this. While I appreciate that my perspective when it comes to racial conversations is limited by the virtue of my birth, any discussion over race requires both of us. It requires your side and my side.
No,
so if the only response is I need to be quiet and listen, it's not a discussion.
No. Hold on.
I'm not saying you said that. I'm not saying you said that.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Because I'm the one that invites you on the show to express yourself in that
clearly,
regard.
Two sentences earlier.
Clearly,
two sentences earlier than that, I said you're not saying that.
Guys, let's leave it there. I appreciate the dialogue and all of you not shying away, obviously, from your opinions, even when they're potentially unpopular. We're going to go straight football here. So after witnessing the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history, the 2016 season is officially over, and Pro Football Focus is reflecting on the season that was with their first ever top 101 player rankings. So here they are. Tom Brady is number 1. The Rams, Aaron Donald, number 2. Aaron Rodgers rounding out the top 3. Coming in at number 4, Khalil Mack. And in the 5th spot is Matty Ice. Max, how about we start with you here? Was Tom Brady in that cliff, the best player in 2016?
No, he wasn't. Aaron Rodgers was. And by the way, Pro Football Focus, who had Rodgers as the second quarterback, third player overall, and I don't think they have a bias when they do this. They're charting the whole thing game by game, etc. But they admitted that had it not been for a slow start for Aaron Rodgers likely would have been ahead of Tom Brady. In other words, he hit a higher peak, and once he hit that peak, he sustained it for longer than Tom Brady. Look, I can't argue against Brady, who just won the Super Bowl with an amazing second-hand performance, which Aaron Rodgers didn't have the opportunity to try. By the way, not because of his play. He was hitting receivers. They were dropping the ball. His fullback fumbled in the red zone. His defense rolled over. I mean, he can't do anything about that because though he has a good coach, it's not Bill Belichick, and his team is okay, and the Patriots have an extremely strong team all around, all 3 phases of the game. They're better coached, they have better personnel, clearly, than the Green Bay Packers. And yet, in spite of that, and in spite of the slow start, due to a lack of rhythm because of injury to his receivers and those things, Aaron Rodgers, nevertheless, once he got rolling, outplayed Tom Brady, plain and simple. And by the way, Pro Football Focus implicitly acknowledges that.
Well, listen, here's the deal. Tom Brady, see, as much as I love Aaron Rodgers, remember, I'm the dude that calls him that bad man that he is. But Tom Brady threw for over 3,500 yards, had about 28 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions, had a QBR of 83, had a quarterback rating of 112, finished 11-1 in the 12 games that he played. Now, we sit up here and we say Aaron Rodgers, as Max just eloquently stated, if it were not for the slow start, he would have been blah, blah, blah. That's true. But Tom Brady missed the first 4 games. Okay, so he didn't get a chance to start early because of the Deflategate suspension. Still came out there and went 11-1. And the only game that he lost was to the Seattle Seahawks. Won in the playoffs against Houston. Trounced the Pittsburgh Steelers. Came back from a 28-3 deficit and won his 5th in NFL Super Bowl championship. When you look at what Tom Brady has been able to do, there was no down moment this year for him. There was a down moment earlier on for Aaron Rodgers. That's why I have to put Tom Brady number 1.
Yep. That's not 100% true. He had some slow games and some down games, but he's playing on a team with an excellent defense, excellent special teams all around.
Well, I mean, to some extent, I got to respect what you're doing, Max. I mean, this Aaron Rodgers versus Tom Brady debate, I mean, you're all in at this point. There's no point in folding your hand now. You've already pushed all your chips to the middle of the table. If you folded your hand at this point, I would almost be disappointed in you. You got to see this thing out and see how it's going to work out. It's going to work out poorly, by the way. Tom Brady is number 1. Clearly, everyone understands this. The true debate really isn't between Brady and Rodgers. It was between Brady and Ryan, your MVP, Max. But the reason it's Brady over Ryan.
First, it was Andrew Luck, actually.
Oh, was it Luck? I'm sorry, I forgot about Max's shift on Luck. The reason
Andrew Luck was the 4th quarterback on that list. Congratulations, Pro Football Focus. Got that right, too.
The reason it's Brady has nothing to do with the beginning of the season. It has to do with the end of the season. Yes, he threw only 2 interceptions. Yes, he had the second highest, by a small margin, QBR rating to Matt Ryan. But the ultimate reason he is the best player of 2016 has to do with the last game of the season he played. I'm not going to give Aaron Rodgers some kind of discount because he didn't make it to the Super Bowl. Tom Brady won the Super Bowl. He came back from, what was it? Well, I can't even remember now. 28-3? Well,
Was it 28-3?
It was just the biggest of all time.
With 2 minutes left in the third.
The biggest of all time margin. and he came back. He was the best player of 2016. He's the best quarterback of all time. He's the best football player of all time. Max, good luck seeing his hand out.
And Aaron Rodgers is better than he is. I agree with some of that, but Aaron Rodgers is better than Tom Brady.
This one's tricky. The state of Texas is considering a proposed bill where people would be required to use bathrooms that correspond to the sex of their birth certificate. So the bill is similar to the bill passed in North Carolina, which caused the NBA to relocate this year's All-Star game to New Orleans, something the NFL addressed last week. If a proposal that is discriminatory or inconsistent with our values were to become the law there, that would certainly be a factor considered when thinking about awarding future events. Now, Texas Governor Greg Abbott fired back on the Glenn Beck program.
We don't care what the NFL thinks and certainly what their political policies are, because they are not a political arm of the state of Texas or the United States of America. They need to learn their place in the United States, which is to govern football, not politics.
Stephen A., do you agree with the governor of Texas?
To some degree, yes, I do. I'm not sure I would have used the words know their place. I think that reeks of something far more incendiary. But what I will say is that, you've got the NFL taking positions and its influence by money. I mean, they're trying to ingratiate themselves with the masses and make sure that they can get their figurative hands in anybody's wallet that they can find, because anybody, no matter what race, creed, or whatever you may come from, the bottom line is your money in this country is just as good as anybody else's if you have it. And if they can get their hands in more pockets, that's more money for them. And we all know how important revenue is to the National Football League. They show it on every occasion. I think what you're getting from the governor in that particular instance is saying, excuse me, this is our state. You have a plethora of Americans that live within this state that may feel differently than what the NFL's position is, and you need to take their wishes into consideration more so than you may be willing to, because these issues are things that affect our lives. It's not a game, and you need to address it and treat it with the seriousness that it deserves, as opposed to just ingratiating yourself into a particular equation just because the optics of it look so good and it will facilitate you generating more money. It's not just about money, to lean on what Will would usually say on this show. It's about principle as well. And when it comes to certain issues, our principles, our beliefs, whatever they may be, resonates far more profoundly than just making some money. And that's what I got from what the governor was saying. And what I peel from that is, if you're going to ingratiate yourself into the equation and you're going to speak up about it, A, know what the hell you're talking about, and B, come from a principled position where we could have an intelligent discussion on this matter, as opposed to you just ingratiating yourself into the equation just because it looks good and it will position you to make more money. The governor is coming from a principled position, whether you agree with it or not.
Opposite.
And that much I can respect, because he's saying, hey, bring the rain if you want to, but stand for something, not just for money.
Opposite. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas's comment is so ridiculous on its face that it's transparently a political calculation, because he believes it'll be popular politically. The NFL, I mean, first of all, know your place. Governor, what are you kidding? Sports in this country has sometimes been at its best, has been on the forefront of social change. The Dodgers, Jackie Robinson made the Dodgers, broke the color line in baseball when he and other African Americans couldn't attend public schools throughout this country, all white public schools throughout this country. But he was on the Dodgers. Arizona missed out because they didn't recognize Martin Luther King's Day. Sports has sometimes used its popularity and its leverage to be on the forefront of social change. Know your place. This is not the wrong place for sports to intercede. And by the way, yes, of course, it's an economic calculation, which I think is a good sign by the NFL, because they're calculating that it's a popular enough issue that it could hurt their business if they do business with the state of Texas. And then we'll see if the governor's political calculation is correct, which I do not believe is principled at all. We'll see. I don't know if there really are principles here. I think in one case it's the governor's political calculation, the other case the NFL's bottom line calculation. But we'll see what's what. Does the economics of it all hurt the governor politically, Or is the NFL somehow hurt in the state of Texas, which I doubt? I mean, look, you think football fans, and Texas is a rabid football state, care more about Greg Abbott than football? I disagree, but time will tell.
Well, that's why I think your statement, Max, that the governor's made a political calculus and not standing on principle, kind of you undercut yourself there. I mean, picking a fight with football and the NFL in the state of Texas doesn't reek to me of the most obvious political win a politician could go after. I think he might be doing this for other reasons than simply populist movement. But also, listen, I agree with both of you to some extent. Max, I do think sports leagues, and I think Stephen A. agrees with this as well, have a place taking a position on political issues when they are important and obvious enough that their input is needed. So, for example, hearkening back to just our last segment, if for some reason, some crazy reason, some state reinstituted, for example, Jim Crow laws, would we not want the NBA, the NFL taking a position on those kind of things? The issue is this: if you're going to, you better know what you're talking about, to Stephen A's point. And the NFL on this issue, this is my issue. On this particular issue, these bathroom bills, this was an issue that did not exist 10 years ago. This was one that we weren't even having in the political sphere 10 years ago. It's one where Texas and North Carolina aren't the only states looking at passing these bills. There are 7 others. And according to CNN and CBS polls, which I think were about 9 months ago, the country's pretty divided on this. 50-50 on whether or not these laws should be enacted. So what the NFL is saying here, and when they don't explain their position. This is my position with athletes in general. If you take a position, be able to back it up. What you do is you dumb it down. You say if you boycott, if you don't do business, you say anybody that disagrees with you is the equivalent of a bigot who cannot be dealt with, who should not be done business with. And what you're telling us then is that 50% of people in these polls, or these 7 other states, are simply bigots who should not be dealt with. And that I have a problem with. I have a problem with taking this issue that is a decade old at the most and saying if you're on the wrong side of this issue, if you're on the wrong side of this issue for the next year, the last 5 years, you're not worthy of being done business with. That I have a problem with.
Well, no, they're exercising their First Amendment rights. I mean,
hold on, Max. Hold on, Max, because I'm coming to you. I agree with what Will has said, but I agree with you, Will, but I wanted to get back to you, Max, because here's the difference. The NFL, you got to remember, this is the same league that tried to charge performers to perform at the Super Bowl, for crying out loud. Everything that they can do to get their hands on more revenue is their primary interest. Now, we all know that politicians are politicians, and they're going to go where the wind flows to some degree. We understand that. But the difference here is that the politician itself, the governor of Texas, represents the people of Texas. And there are an abundance of people who side with him on that particular issue. And he could make a legitimate argument, more so than the NFL, that he's speaking on behalf of Texans because he's the governor of Texas. And so when you take that into consideration, and he's saying to the NFL to watch yourself, I don't think he's saying sports has no place in politics or whatever. I don't think he's going that far, because we all understand that a particular athlete, like Will pointed out, if by some chance Jim Crow laws were exacted, how are you going to expect an athlete or somebody else not to speak out against that? But what he's saying, and what I think he's bringing into the focus, is that I'm coming from a moral position on behalf of the people here in Texas that I represent. You are coming at us on behalf of the NFL in terms of your revenue. What's more important? And I think he has a point in that particular argument right there.
Look, Citizens United, which was seen as a conservative ruling, is based on the idea that corporations exercise free speech through their business decisions, basically, through how they spend money. It's a First Amendment issue. I mean, and according to the governor, Will, if he's standing up for principle, or Stephen A., if he's standing up for principle, then presumably the Republican governor does not like government issuing edicts that chill or that interfere with business practices, right? Isn't that the idea?
Max, I don't think anyone's suggesting
that's what's happening here.
But no one is suggesting that the NFL doesn't have a right to take a position. I don't think Greg Abbott is saying that. He's saying you're on thin ice if you're telling 50% of this country that their position on this issue equates them to being a bigot that it should not be done business with. That is thin ice for the NFL.
I want to address that. I want to address the idea that the population supports something.
You guys, because we have to move on.
Okay, that on its face means you need to be extra sensitive about how you deal with the issue. 1901, Theodore Roosevelt has Booker T. Washington to the White House. Well, half the country was outraged because it was a black man coming to dinner, not just visiting the White House, but as a dinner guest. And half the country, particularly the South, went crazy over it.
Yes.
Now, was that important? Should the point have been made back then to be very sensitive to the people who may not have even thought of themselves as bigoted or wrong-headed at the time, maybe ignorant, that their sensibilities needed to be catered to, or was it more important that the president do the right thing?
And these bathroom bills are the same kind of thing?
on this issue.
And these bathroom bills are the same kind of thing as
that?
that?
No, I'm not. That's why I'm not commenting on the bathroom issue itself, because that's a whole separate discussion. But there are many who feel that it is a moral issue. Then we should be sensitive to one side who is against it, but not to the other side that is for it.
We have to go. Obviously, a lot of layers to this issue, and it won't be going away. Will, thank you so much for being with us.
You bet.
And now, insurance-minded speeches from Geico.
It's a common expression, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. However, what if the horse's mouth is filled with useful insurance tools? This is the exact case with the Geico app. Yes, the app is free and therefore a gift horse. However, look inside the app and behold, emergency roadside assistance, digital ID cards, bill pay. Get the Geico app. Look it in the mouth. Get amazing services. Thank you.
Roddy White, who spent his entire 11-year career with the Falcons, had some really strong comments about how Kyle Shanahan and his former team blew the largest lead in Super Bowl history. Listen up.
The city of Atlanta needed that championship. Like, they needed that championship. And they had it. I mean, I could blame Kyle Shanahan for not running the ball 3 times in a row.
You just said you wanted to punch him.
Because I felt for my guys.
But that would sort of suggest that you blame him for the loss.
For me, it's like, as a coaching staff, right?
Right.
And you're on the headset. We all are on the headsets. We all communicating. Like, nobody said, listen, we're going to run the ball 3 times, and we're going to go home and be Super Bowl champs. Like, nobody on the sideline said that. Like, I don't understand that.
Look who's here, Marky Mark, the 3-time Super Bowl champ. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to be on the program.
We love it when you're here. Max, we want you to weigh in here. Are Roddy's comments directed at the right person?
They're not. The buck doesn't stop with middle management. It stops with the boss. It's got to stop with Quinn. And especially when Dan Quinn was there on the other side of the ball, having to look helplessly, having to stand by helplessly, because he wasn't in Pete Carroll's position at the time, and watch a passing play be called when a running play should have been called to lose the Super Bowl. And so even if you've given the edict, hey, just keep playing the way we've always played, and Shanahan wants to keep being aggressive, whatever, when as long as you run the ball, you are virtually guaranteed of a Super Bowl win. You just got to run the ball twice. Even if you lose a couple yards, the odds are still overwhelmingly huge. You kick a field goal to make it an 11-point game. Game basically over at that point. How can the buck be passed to anyone but Quinn ultimately? You've just gone through the experience. You have to, at that point, get a handle on the situation and say, whoa, let's do the right thing here. So the buck would stop with him anyway, but particularly considering his experience, I'm surprised it didn't, and he got to absorb the blame.
Well, I'm not going to sit up there and say that Quinn has no responsibility because the buck stops with him. But I do think a majority of the onus falls on the shoulder of Kyle Shanahan. And I got to give Roddy White credit where credit is due in that regard. And here's why, Max and Schlereth, because even though Roddy White played one season under Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta last year, and then, obviously he was let go or what have you, here's my issue. The fact of the matter is that Dan Quinn has a defensive background, not an offensive background. He deferred to Kyle Shanahan, who was considered the golden boy, as we know, with a plethora of teams looking at him for head coaching opportunities. And ultimately, he ended up landing in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, we knew he was going to San Francisco before the Super Bowl because John Lynch had been signed to a 6-year deal, and that was at the behest of Kyle Shanahan. So we knew where he was going. We knew what kind of contract was waiting for him. We knew what job he was going to land, and we knew he was going to be a head coach. You have that responsibility. You're in the Super Bowl. It's the biggest stage. You're supposed to be the golden boy. Yes, you ultimately have to answer to Quinn. I get that. But when I look at a head coach, how many times have I said this, Schlereth? How many times have I said this, Max? It's about what got you there. Meaning, if you're Quinn, what got you the head coaching job? It was because of what you were as a defensive coordinator. I would put more responsibility on Quinn if he were an offensive coordinator who ultimately got the head coaching job in Atlanta. That wasn't the case. Defense was his thing. Kyle Shanahan was the golden boy. He's supposed to know better than this stuff. And the fact that he didn't justifies why even during his 49ers press conference, when he was introduced as the head coach, he says he's watched it, he's watched the tapes, and it will stay with him for the rest of his life because he knows in the end, culpability rests primarily on his shoulders, even if the buck stops elsewhere.
When you're a shooter, you know what you do? You shoot. That's what you do. Until your coach says, listen, man, we're in a situation where we don't want you to shoot. We want you to hold on to the ball. And for me, I look at Dan Quinn and say the majority of the onus goes on a coaching staff. You're the head coach. You're the CEO of your football team. You're the guy that's in control of what's going on that football field. Kyle Shanahan's going to err on the side of aggressiveness. You know, the sad thing to me is the narrative changes. This has been one of the great play calling seasons in the history of this league. Kyle Shanahan and the creativity, the ability to create, the mesh that he had with his quarterback, and the ability to call plays and absolutely eviscerate defenses all season long was on display, especially the last 8 weeks of the season. And now what we come down to is, Kyle Shanahan screwed up the Super Bowl. And I don't look at it that way. I look at it, your responsibility as a head coach, what gives us the best opportunity to win a football game? And the best opportunity to win a football game is, hey, pump the brakes. We're going to run it 3 times. We're going to kick a field goal. We're on the 22-yard line. And that's going to give us the best opportunity. And I'm telling you, man, I've sat on the sideline or I've been on the football field. We had an offensive line coach by the name of Alex Gibbs. And Alex Gibbs would be up in Mike Shanahan's face screaming at him in those situations. You better run the ball. And it would come down to, literally it would come down to fisticuffs if you decided to throw a 7-step drop in that situation with no back in the backfield, an empty backfield set. So that to me is your head coach going, we ain't going to go that way. Well, I'm going to pull in the reins.
Slereth, I got a question because, obviously you forgot more football. You forgot more football than I could ever hope to know. But just imagine me and you on my radio show right now. I'm playing role of devil's advocate. It sounds to me, I understand your point siding with Max about the culpability ultimately falls on the shoulders of the head coach. I'm not disputing that. What I'm not doing, however, is going as far as you're going in terms of absolving Kyle Shanahan from his responsibility to exercise his intellect. Right. I know you do what you do, but you do have a 28-3 lead that went to 28-9, 28-12, 28-20. It is Tom Brady on the other side of the ball. At some point in time, even though you're not the head coach, you do have intelligence. You're about to be a head coach. How come it's beyond the pale to look at you and say, excuse me, you're intelligent enough to know that, after this catch by Julio Jones, all I need to do is run the damn football twice and kick a field goal from Matt Bryant, who had made 24 of his last 25 field goals between the 35 and the 45-yard line. I don't need a head coach to impose himself to have the intellect to know as an offensive coordinator who's about to be a head coach a week later that, you know what? We might need to run the football in this particular situation. Why is that too much to ask of Kyle Shanahan to know?
Yeah, you know what? You're 100% right. It's not. But when you go down that road, that's when the head coach needs to reel you in and say, listen, what gives us the best opportunity percentage-wise to win this football game? Listen, Dan Quinn isn't the coordinator of the offense, but he's not the coordinator of the defense either. He is the grand poobah of all things football on that sideline. That's why they're paying you, to make that decision. So if your offensive coordinator goes off the rails, you need to stop him. You're on the headsets and say, dude, we ain't going down this road.
No, we're on the same page. The buck has to stop with the head coach, particularly given Quinn's experience. But quickly, you think that Shanahan's the target for Roddy White because that Shanahan offense took off for the Falcons as soon as Roddy White was off the team?
Well, yeah, Roddy White does not like Kyle Shanahan. That's been apparent. But he makes a good point. Like they lost that Super Bowl. That Super Bowl was lost because of what happened in that second half and some bad decisions. When they got pressure, they folded and they made poor decisions.
My only point that I peel from all of this, Schlereth, we all know that the buck stops with the head coach. I'm not disputing what you and Max are saying in that regard, but I'm not going to absolve the offensive coordinator because he's the offensive coordinator. At the end of the day, you should have the intellect, particularly when you're about to be a head coach a few days later. You should have the intellect to say, I kind of don't need to just throw the football now when all I need is a field goal. I really don't.
Hey, Stephen, I agree with that. Here's the other thing. You should have the intellect, if you're going to throw the football, not to get in shotgun 7-step drop with no back in the backfield to protect you either. You know, you shouldn't be in an empty set. So 100%.
He's only the Super Bowl on the line.
Right. He made a dramatic mistake. But I think the head coach at some point needs to step in because that's your responsibility as a head coach.
Yeah, and especially because not as a head coach, but he went through it in Seattle as well, as Max alluded to. Throwback Thursday, VY, Vince Young, who hasn't taken a snap in the NFL since 2011, has his sights on making a comeback to the NFL. Young, who turns 34 in May, hired agent Lee Steinberg, who had this to say about Vince. He has a dream of playing more football and being a role model. Stephen A., is this Vince Young comeback talk a waste of time?
Yes, it is. I think it's over for him. He hasn't played in the NFL since 2011. You're playing the most important position. You were not the greatest passer in the world to begin with. You were decent. You had a 31-19 record as a starter. I personally believe that his growth was stunted because he played for Jeff Fisher, who never really wanted him in Tennessee to begin with. But even when you were there, I'm just looking at some of his numbers here. The best season he had from a completion percentage was 2007, where he completed 62% of his passes. The last 3 years, 2009, 2010, 2011, he completed 58, 59, and 58% of his passes. These are not stellar numbers. He's never thrown for more than 2,500 yards in the season in his career. He's never thrown for more than 12 touchdowns in the season in his career, which was his rookie year. So when you look at those numbers, which are relatively suspect to begin with, and then you take into account his absence from the game, and then you couple all of that with the fact that when he was playing, there was a reprieve or a sabbatical that he had to take because the shrapnel of criticism was so immense for him that he couldn't take it. All of these things lend itself towards looking at him and saying, you were a talented guy. You were phenomenal as a quarterback at Texas under Coach Mac Brown. But in the end, as a professional NFL quarterback, you didn't measure up to snuff when you were playing, when you were younger, and when you did have a starting quarterback position. So why should 6 years later, should I believe that you're going to be able to do it now after such a lengthy absence? It's unfair to him and what has happened to his career, but I don't see it working. I think his career is over as a quarterback in the NFL, period. I think it's done. It's a pipe dream.
Is it a waste of time? Stephen A., you say yes, it's a waste of time. Let me say, Vince Young is not going to make it back to the NFL, certainly not as a starting quarterback. But that doesn't make the pursuit a waste of time. He's old in football years, 33. He's rusty, and he wasn't that good when last seen in action. But he's young in human years. And there was a time when, look, he had the greatest college performance I've ever seen in any sport when he won the national title. It's unbelievable. And then he had a promising rookie season. And as you said, under difficult circumstances, coach didn't really want him. But he did regress and wound up out of the league. So how do you tell somebody who was once great at what he did on the second highest level and then was promising on the highest level and then faced circumstances that were difficult to really fulfill your potential under, how do you tell that person who's still a young man, don't pursue your dreams? What would Tim Tebow say? Pursue those dreams until they're like, make them rip the uniform off you.
I love this side of you, Max.
Make sure they won't hand it back to you. Well, this is the truth. I know it rings hollow when you say it's the journey, not the destination. But in this case, I really do think that's true. Even if he never makes it back, and I don't think he will, it's a worthwhile pursuit and not a waste of time if you're Vince Young.
Well, Well, I just want to say, Dr. Ruth, to both of you, it's very, very touching and sentimental that you both feel the way that you feel. I mean, I'm touched. If I had some tissue, here, I would wipe the tears from my face. But I don't recall the question being, should he pursue his dream or whatever, where we need to invoke Tim Tebow. What I recall the question being is basically paraphrasing, how plausible is this? Do you think he will be successful? He can pursue what he wants to pursue. I happen to like Vince Young very much as a person. I wish him all the best. But if you're asking me, do I believe he will be successful? I am telling you emphatically, I do not believe he's going to do it. He's been away from the game too long.
You just really revealed something about yourself. You're telling on yourself, Stephen A. Smith. The question was, is it a waste of time? And you heard that as, will he be successful? But that's not the only way you can spend your time. It's not a waste of time if you do your best and ultimately fail to reach your goal. There's value in the pursuit.
Stephen A., just enjoy the journey, would you? All right, we're moving on, guys. My boy, Daniel Jeremiah, you might know him as Move the Sticks from NFL.com, polled 5 NFL executives from teams with established quarterbacks and asked, if your team had a glaring quarterback need, which option would you pursue to solve the problem? 2 of the 5 executives picked Tony Romo. Stephen A., are you surprised Tony Romo got the most votes?
I'm not surprised simply because he's a one-hit wonder in their mind. Their jobs are on the line. They're looking at the 78-49 record, not the fact that he's won 2 playoff games grand total in his entire 10-year career as a starter. That's what they're looking at. I think it's foolish, but that's how they feel.
I'm very surprised by this. Romo is injury prone, and how can anyone think he'd make it through a season upright? But I think it speaks to the lack of faith in the other quarterback options. That's what it seems like to me. I am surprised the pick is Romo.
You are so disrespectful.
He is going to fall off a cliff.
Shut the hell up.
That's not even close to my best.
They're wrong. And I don't give a damn that they agree with me or not. Here's the deal. Draymond Green may have been wrong to call James Dolan, having a slave mentality per se. What may have been more accurate is calling him an overbearing, insecure bully. That would have been apropos. Nobody could argue with that. But it's interesting that you'd use those words for anyone when it comes to Charles Oakley, because some have looked at Charles Oakley that way. Charles Oakley would tell you no, he's never been that way. He only responds to you confronting him. He doesn't initiate or instigate anything. Fair enough. But here's an incident where Charles Oakley could take, and he could literally spark something far more positive. He should lay low. He should chill. And he should come to New Orleans and enjoy All-Star Weekend, which is what I'm hearing he's scheduled to do. Remember that Charles Oakley met with James Dolan and Commissioner Adam Silver the other day while Michael Jordan was on the phone. In that meeting, James Dolan apologized to Charles Oakley to his face. He welcomed him to the Knick family. Not only did he do that, but he lifted the banishment from Madison Square Garden and asked him to return. He told him he has no problem with him ingratiating himself with the Knicks family, that it's something that James Dolan himself would welcome. According to what I've heard, on 99% of the things that Charles Oakley wanted, James Dolan, a billionaire, capitulated. The one thing he hasn't capitulated to was a public apology. We could make the argument that he should publicly apologize to Charles Oakley since he publicly denigrated him. But that's something that we can debate until the cows come home. In the end, here's what the bottom line is. The commissioner invoked himself because All-Star Weekend is a priority. He gets that. Michael Jordan gets that. James Dolan gets that. And Charles Oakley should too, because last time I checked, he will forever be a part of the NBA family. And that should usurp everything else, no matter how he feels emotionally.
Well said, Stephen A. And for more on our final takes, make sure you visit our Facebook and Twitter pages. Leave your comments and voice your opinions there. First Take on the road at the NBA All-Star Game. Catch us live in New Orleans tomorrow. We're on the 4th floor of the Riverview Room located at 600 Decatur. John Wall, Kenny Smith, many more will join the desk. Doors open 7:30 a.m. local. Come on and pack the house. Stephen A. and Max are already down there. Guys, how many beads are you going to collect tonight at Bourbon Street?
No comment.
Yeah, not me.
Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. Catch First Take weekdays, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific on ESPN. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow from New Orleans.
Yo, everybody get up! Everybody get up! Everybody needs to understand that I'm more than simply a hype man for this rap group, just like Geico is more than just a company that can save you money. Geico also has fast and friendly claim service, so they can help you when you need it most. And while I do love being a hype man, I also love reading for children's audiobooks. Like Little Bo Peep, she lost a sheep, and she don't know where to find them. Yo!
Geico. Expect great savings and a whole lot more.